Okay, so I am now going to share my screen. It's been fun. The technology is great when it works, but not always that easy. So in case you're wondering if you've come to the right place, I hope you have. This is Learning to Code and Coding to Learn with Jim Cash. And we're very, very excited to have this session with all of you today. I wanted to begin just by doing a land acknowledgement. I know and recognize that we're not all in the same place, that we're all over this beautiful province of ours. But we would like to acknowledge that we're gathered in the territories of various Indigenous peoples, and we further recognize that their stewardship of these lands in which we live, learn, work, and play. So beyond that, I then have the wonderful privilege of introducing our facilitator today, who is Jim Cash. And I wanted to say that Jim is currently a grade 3 teacher in Peel. But I thought it was fascinating that between 2010 and 2019, he supported 75 schools in his district school board, and his title was Modern Learning Resource Teacher. I think that's super cool, Jim. I'd like that title. I also discovered in chatting, yeah, it's a good title. Good title is important. I also discovered in chatting to Jim that he holds a master's degree in educational technology, just like I do. So we have that in common. And he has undergraduate degrees in cognitive psychology and in education. So there you go. Before passing you over, I want to say good luck and over to you, Jim. I will be putting your full bio into the chat in a few minutes. I'll also be putting the link to your slide presentation up in the chat box so that people have that.
So that's fantastic. Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for moderating this webinar. It's great to have you here. I feel very confident that you're there in the background taking care of all the technical aspects of things. So thank you very much for that. And I want to welcome everybody who took some time out of their busy day to join us here. It's going to be an hour hopefully full of various pieces of information and resources and discussion that can help you use coding in both a practical way and a way that's going to benefit your students in terms of their thinking skills and so on. So I just want to start by moving into my slides and sharing my screen so that you can have a look at that. And if something doesn't look right, Lindy, make sure you let me know. Does that look okay?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, so let's start. Should be full screen now, right?
It sure is.
Okay, thank you. So, just want to make sure that I can switch it. Okay, so I wanted to thank everybody again for responding to the webinar. It was really, really great to get that input in advance of the today's webinar, because it helps me to know where people are at in terms of their experience with coding in their classrooms, with using some of the tools, with the grade levels that you teach and so on. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And I included the screenshots of the graphs that Google Forms gave me, just thought maybe some of you might be interested in seeing what they look like. Okay. So I want to start with a very short, it's about a 1.5 minute video. This is Seymour Papert on the right. He's one of the people that influenced me the most in terms of using coding with students, and it's sort of an inspiration for the title of this webinar, Coding to Learn, Learning to Code, because I think they kind of go hand in hand, and you can think differently about both kinds of things, of learning to code and coding to learn. One of his most famous quotes is on the left there. Does the computer program the child, or does the child program the computer? Because he started to do this in a time when a lot of classrooms were very teacher focused rather than student focused, and when technology came in, technology was used in that way and being sort of running a program that the students had to follow, and he wanted things to happen in a bit of a different way. Anyway, this is his video. He's talking about mathematics programs that he was aware of in the 90s. This was done in the early 2000s, 80s and 90s, where students were very worksheet focused and not really doing what he thinks is sort of true mathematics. And he saw using the computer and students learning to code was a way for them to actually be active about mathematics and kind of learn in mathland. So let's take a little bit of a listen to what he has to say.
What they teach in school, I like to call math, as opposed to mathematics. Mathematics is one of the great jewels of achievement of the human mind. Math is a lot of boring stuff that you make kids do with pencils and squared papers and filling in numbers. There's no relation. While it's true that most people in math class don't learn much math, most kids in French class don't learn much French. But we don't say that they're not Frenchly minded. We don't say they don't have a head for French, because we know that they grew up in France, they'd learn French perfectly well. And I think that my image of learning mathematics is, if we all learned mathematics in Mathland, we would all learn mathematics perfectly well. And how can we create a Mathland? That's really what it's about. I think that what we can do with the computer is allow individuals to find their own way of coming to terms with what mathematics is and seeing it in a way that matches their passion and their intellectual style.
So one of the quotes, one of the things that he said in that video is something that stuck with me, and something that I always think about when I'm working with students and using coding in my program is, how can I create a Mathland? Just like an immersion approach to learning language, how can I create a Mathland for students where they can go and sort of be immersed in the mathematical thinking and processes? So that's what I'm trying to do. I don't think I've ever been fully successful in doing that, but it's something that at least I aspire to. A number of the slides I've included in my slide deck that you all will have access to. A number of things here I'm not going to click on and go through, but they're here to hopefully act as a resource later if you wish to come back and look at things. This is the link to another presentation that sort of looks at reasons why, the rationale behind why you should, maybe not you, but educators might want to spend some time having their students learn to code, and what would be the benefits, both cognitively and in terms of learning and connecting to the curriculum and so on. So this is a link to that resource and that presentation. So that's here for you if you want to look at that later. One of the slides in that presentation was this graphic on the left here. And I made this graphic several years ago, 2016. It kind of summarizes my own growth in teaching students to code and the reasons why I was doing it. I freely admitted that in the 90s, when I was starting to teach, and there was things like BASIC and Pascal and those kinds of text-based coding platforms, when I would work with students, I was wanting them to learn computer science concepts, such as how to use an if-then statement, writing loops, learning binary and hexadecimal and Boolean logic. And I really wanted the students to really start using their technology that they had available to them at the time. I didn't really think of it in a way where they were more actively using coding as a literacy. They were learning it like a literacy, like something like reading, like learning a musical instrument, like learning to paint, and using those tools to explore ideas, things in the green blocks, collaborate, and so on. And I didn't really take advantage of those ideas. So I put this graphic together both to be kind of throwing it out there for discussion. It was deliberately made to be provocative and create discussion about why you want kids to code. And I have to say I was very successful. When I would show this to teachers, a very lively debate would ensue between teachers talking about their reasons to code or get their students to code. But let's move right into why you're here. Hopefully this is going to match what you're hoping to learn today or learn about. I want to focus on using Scratch, and mostly on Scratch, and I'll talk about Makecode a little bit too, but I wanted to take a quick tour of both of these tools. They're both completely free for students to use. Now the microbit is an actual physical device. It's not a mini computer. It's a small little device that you can code. It's about $25 each. You don't have to have a microbit to use the Makecode site because there's a virtual microbit on the screen. But more and more schools are looking into buying those, and I really like them. I have some for my school simply because they allow you to create a lot of different projects on a fairly affordable little circuit board. But I wanted to talk about Scratch first of all. On the left-hand side, you can see some links to some pictures of screenshots of what Scratch looks like and a link to the Scratch site. So I want to take a quick move over to Scratch. When you go to the Scratch website, this is basically a creative toolkit for students. Everything is here that students from, I would say, roughly around grade 3 and up, all the way up through middle school, secondary, and university. It's a toolbox. It's an environment where students can be creative, have a project area, share their projects, discuss them, create, test, play, look at what other Scratch programmers can do, and so on. So one of the main things that students will need to do as soon as they get here is log in with their account. And I can talk more about that later. I don't want to get into a lot of the technical basics of those sorts of things, but I know those are often questions that teachers have, and I'm happy to talk about that. I am willing to sort of stay after 5 o'clock on Zoom here. If anybody wants to stay to answer questions of that sort of nature, I'm happy to do that too. So when you go to Scratch and you click on Create at the top left, it takes you into sort of the development environment in Scratch. And just a quick 5-cent tour here. The areas are sort of delineated in zones. On the right-hand side, where I'm moving Scratch around, that's called the stage in that white rectangle there. Down here, where you see a picture of Scratch and it says Sprite 1, those are sprites. Those are just different characters or things that are doing things on this stage. You could have thought of this as these are the actors on the stage, but they're not always animals or people. They could be balls or tennis rackets or musical instruments. So those are down there. All of the code blocks that students might want to use, students don't have to type anything, which is one of the things I really like. They can just move blocks around very visually. Scratch was inspired by Lego way, way back. The idea of the rationale was if students can snap Lego bricks together and make things really easily without almost any instruction, maybe the same could be done for computer programming. And that was sort of the rationale back when Scratch started at MIT in the lifelong kindergarten group in the Media Lab. So the programming blocks are divided into colors, and those are different sort of categories of blocks where you can do things. So there's a start, stop, a green flag, and a red stop sign up here. So very, very simply, I can make a very quick program. When the green flag is clicked, move Scratch 10 steps. He already happens to be facing to the right, which in Scratch it's 90 degrees. So whenever time I click the green flag, he moves 10 steps. So there's my extremely simple program. And a step in Scratch is a pixel, one little dot on the screen. But there's lots of different kinds of blocks here. Sound blocks, sensing blocks, and so on. And then there's even extra blocks down here that you can add that are called extensions. So if you wanted Scratch to draw things with a pen, you can do that too. So and that's a very quick tour of Scratch. We're going to go in there a little bit longer in a minute. In Makecode, so Makecode is a website that was created by and sustained by Microsoft in association with Microbit. So Microbit, again, is that small little circuit board that students can create projects on. And the Makecode site, I think, was fairly, to a great extent, inspired by the Scratch site. When you go to the main page, there's all of these project ideas, which Scratch has too, and there's tutorials as well. But if we go in and want to quickly make a new project, you might see right away that there are some similarities. So it's kind of reversed. So the project that you're working on is on the left, and that's like a picture of a microbit device. The blocks are in the center. So these are the collections of blocks, and they're all different colors as well. So they all do different things as well. And if you want to grab a block and bring it in over into the programming area, so this is the area where the code sits that's going to program the microbit. So for example, if I wanted the microbit to to show something on the screen when I pushed one of the buttons. If I bring in this code here on button A pressed, I would like it to show hello. So this says, when the button A is pushed, please show the word hello. So if you look over on the microbit here, all microbits have 25 little LEDs. Those are those little gray dots there. There's an A and a B switch. There's other sort of connection points down here. But if I click on button A here, it scrolls the word hello, exactly what I had in quotes here, across the screen. So very quickly, within a few minutes there, I was able to create 2 quick programs in Scratch and Makecode for microbit. And it doesn't take too long if you're sharing this with students for the first time and trying to explain how it all works. It doesn't take too long for them to catch on and say, okay, so that's how it works. And then they're just, in my experience, ready to go, and they want to stop listening to you and they want to get started with it. One of the things at the very beginning of starting to use Scratch 11 years ago, I made the mistake of trying to explain bit by bit how the whole Scratch site worked and then having students start. I found through trial and error and time and practice that I'd show how little tiny pieces would work, and then away they'd go and I'd start using the site, and that worked better, but we can talk more about that in a minute. One thing I just wanted to point out on the Makecode site before we move back to the presentation is that in the microbit Makecode site, there's also a way to look at the code using JavaScript. And JavaScript seems to be a very popular, especially middle school and later, a popular a language for students to learn, and teachers are looking at who are wanting to look at that in more detail in terms of what they want to do with students. JavaScript's very highly widely used, and it's easy to use because every browser understands JavaScript. So this is a kind of a way to look at what does it look like with block coding, and then what would it look like with in JavaScript, and you can go back and forth. And you can actually code a microbit with either way. Okay. Okay. So I just wanted to talk really quickly about privacy and the terms of service of both sites. I did make links to the terms of use or terms of service page for Scratch and Makecode, and the privacy policy for Scratch and Makecode. I think it's really important for teachers to be reading these. They're a lot less sort of legalese than they used to be, although they still sort of sound like that. I just wanted to include in these bullet points here, I'm not going to read them, but I did include some highlights of sort of interesting aspects of it. With Scratch, for example, if students want to share their projects and use the site over a long term, they need to create an account on Scratch. And that creates a place where they can log in and save their projects so that they can log into any other device at home or elsewhere or whatever, and start and continue to work on projects and edit them and so on. So it is important, I think, for students to have an account. You can have a teacher's account on Scratch and quickly get students going with students within your class on Scratch. Just beware, if you do use a teacher account on Scratch, the students are forever locked to you and your class. They can never decouple themselves from your class. And for that reason, I generally have my students create their own account. I sent home a letter and that for parents to sort of say, your child is invited to use this site, and it gives all kinds of information, links to all of this information about terms of use and privacy and so forth. And then I have them sign that, and that allows me to use, for the students to register on the site and use their site in Peel, and then I keep those permission forms. It's obviously really important to follow your school board's policies and operating procedures in terms of student and teacher use of the tools.
Can I just interrupt you for 3 seconds? First of all, a lot of people are trying to access your presentation and are having some difficulties with the bit.ly. It works for me and it works for some, but it's not working for everybody. We're trying to figure out why that is. I'm guessing that after the session we can double check that.
Yes, and just as a guess, if they're not using capital letters, bit.ly is case sensitive. So if you don't have, I think it was bit.ly /
OTF May 7.
Yes, the OTF in May, those letters must be capitalized. And if they're not, you will absolutely not be able to access it.
Right. And the two links that you gave me, one is for the presentation, and the second link.
Was for the survey, I believe.
Right. So I think people should be able to access those. And then while I've interrupted you, there were a couple of questions. Somebody asked about connections to grade 4 and 5 Ontario curriculum.
And that's coming up, yep.
Okay, good. And the other question that came up had to do with where you can purchase microbits in bulk.
Oh, okay. There's lots of places where you can purchase them. I would be talking to other schools who've bought them. Maybe at the end there, at 5 o'clock, when I'm sort of sticking around afterwards, I can talk about some of the specific places where we've ordered them for my school. But yeah, they are definitely available in Canada through various places. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about that too. Thanks for stopping me, by the way, Lindy.
Awesome. Keep going. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, don't apologize. Anytime that's happening, I've got my chat turned off, so I'm just, that's great that you're telling me. Okay. So Scratch for coding, you might have heard from colleagues that there's lots of other tools that students can use to learn how to code. They might have said CS First, and CS First actually uses Scratch, but there are other tools that students can use. For example, on Hour of Code, there's other kinds of environments where students can learn to code, and they're made specifically for children. I like Scratch for a lot of different reasons. It's definitely free and non-commercial. It's supported by a nonprofit in the United States. It's extremely easy to get started. It can be used in an extremely simple way initially, like you saw me create a program with just 2 blocks. But it can be used in increasingly sophisticated and complex ways as the student grows with their ability to code. And I'm not just talking about sort of, lack of a better term, kind of kiddie stuff. You can do some quite complex mathematics to support some amazing things that you'd like to do in Scratch. Really, just because it's block coding and it looks colorful and has these snap together blocks, some people think that it's not powerful, and it actually is, and it will definitely grow with the child. And it's not a first step to get into sort of real coding or text-based coding. It's only because text-based coding a lot of the text-based coding platforms that you use to create apps, they don't have block-based versions. That's the only reason why you don't see that. So just because it's block-based, my point is that doesn't mean that it's not powerful. Scratch also allows personalization, which is hugely important. Students can personalize their projects and make them exciting to themselves and their friends, which is absolutely one of the key aspects of using Scratch with students. And it supports a diversity of learner interests and ways of learning. The site supports collaboration and remixing, which means students can take their friends' projects and make a duplicate of it, and start messing around with it without messing around with the original version of it all. And that's exciting because it's fun to see what somebody else does with what you've created and so on. And of course, Scratch is created in a project-based learning environment. A lot of teachers in the survey asked about, well, how do I get started with coding with my students? And we are going to get to the curricular connections later. And I am going to focus on that quite a bit because that is absolutely a legitimate and very important aspect of things. But my point right now in talking about the next things for the next 5 minutes is that if your students aren't getting into it and excited about it from the start, it's probably not going to work out that great, simply because they might not want to continue it. So there's a number of different ways that you can get started using coding with your students, and you can use, this applies to whatever platform you happen to be using. I'm going to be talking about Scratch because I think it works the best from my experience. If you're using a project-based learning approach and you're comfortable with that approach with students, on this slide, I'm not going to go through everything here, but it's talking about kind of the conditions that need to be set in your learning environment for, I think, this to take root and really work with students. And a lot of these this is my text here, and this is hard-won knowledge in my case. I made tons, and I continue to make mistakes all the time in my practice and continue to learn from students. and continue to pay attention to what's working and what's not, and oh, that just turned them off, and that was really exciting, and I'm constantly trying to make sure that I'm staying in touch and in tune. But giving a huge amount of time, the way I do it is with a project-based learning approach, I like to give an enormous amount of time initially, several months actually, with several sessions per week, where students can log into Scratch, they get their accounts going, and I give them a couple of periods, minimum a week, to just play and create projects that they're excited about. I make sure they have time to share their projects with the rest of the class. Scratch is device agnostic. It works on any device now. There's lots of time for students to be sharing and talking about what they've learned each day and share that with friends. There's something called the 4P approach, and that's something I'm going to talk about in a minute, but it's created by MIT and their lifelong kindergarten group. And the 4Ps are projects, peers, passion, and play. And so that's going through my head all the time. How can I create an environment where my students are working on projects in collaboration with their peers, with their friends in the class, in a playful environment where they're invited to tinker and experiment and play, and that's okay, and things don't always work, and connect to their passions and interests. And again, Scratch was specifically designed and created to allow students to tap into and share and express and have fun with their passions and interests. And I think you'll see that with some of the projects that are coming up. So in really simple terms, the basic plan is provide a lot of time for students initially so they can build confidence and competency in coding. And then once that happens, so this year in grade 3, up until March, but this year in grade 3, September, October, November, December, my students were coding with Scratch. They had lots of time each week to code. And then around January, I started to have some other ideas, some design tasks, some challenges, and some curricular connected projects that I wanted them to be working on. But I only started that after I had a sense that all of my students had a basic competency in Scratch and felt fairly confident with not just basically how Scratch works, but having several projects under their belt and feeling pretty confident with coding basic projects. So then it's kind of the idea is that then you can sort of exploit the fact that they have that competency and confidence, and then you can start to have them do some projects where they're learning these things. Now, like things that you have connected to the curriculum. Now, what we'll see is that a lot of the stuff that's happening between September and December, all that play, that is all connected to the Ontario curriculum. It's kind of on me and my actively watching and listening and taking pictures and recording things down and writing things down. I'm looking for connections. And with Scratch, because it's kind of a mathematical, you can't really code in Scratch without speaking mathematically and logically to the computer. And of course, that's connected to a lot of the mathematical thinking processes in Ontario. So we'll talk about that when we talk about the examples coming up. But I do think about this a lot. I think about the idea that, like, if you're teaching a child to paint, and there's lots of techniques and philosophies and approaches and all kinds of things to do with painting that a child could learn or a person can learn in their lifetime, you wouldn't necessarily say, okay, we're going to learn what the paints are, here are the colors, and here's how the brushes work in the paper. Now I'd like you to paint something that shows how you feel when you win a game outside, or express yourself, create a painting that expresses this idea or that. You probably, the children might have a lot of difficulty doing that because they don't have a lot of competency or confidence yet with the medium. Same with writing music. If they just learned to play the recorder over the last week, or just beginning to, you wouldn't say, or I wouldn't say at least, now I'd like you to write a sonata using the recorder that expresses some sort of a sadness you have or something. They need to develop that literacy over time first. And I think of Scratch and coding the same way. I think of it like a literacy, and I want them to build that up first. This is the the 4P approach that is grounded in tons of research. If you want to go that route and find out all the research behind this, it exists, and it's all connected to the Scratch site if you go to some of the links there for teachers. But again, the 4P approach is the idea that you're creating your learning environment so that it's in tune with the idea of students are working in a collaborative environment with their peers. You're encouraging collaboration and sharing. They're working on projects, so they're not working on puzzles or assignments or activities that you give at all. And then sometimes the question is, well, what am I supposed to do as a teacher if they're all working on their projects? What do I do? I work on projects too, and I work on real projects that I'm working on, and every now and then I will share my projects and say, here's what I'm working on in Scratch right now. I want to talk to you for like 5 minutes about what I'm doing and what I'm planning to do. So in a way, I'm showing them what I'm doing, showing them my code, what I'm working on that particular day, talking through a few things that I want to do, and kind of modeling the kind of behavior and values and approaches and communication that I want from them. And it doesn't happen right away, but if it's encouraged and you're having other students in your class also sharing things right from the start, then they realize that, okay, sharing what I'm doing and what I've learned is really important. That's one of the structures that I put in place very, very early on. And I think it's super important that at the end of any sort of session that your students have, they know that 10 minutes before the bell or the end of the period, everybody stops, logs off, gathers together as a group. You might have an LCD running with a computer connected to it. And my question's always, okay, so we're back together. We had a great time today. So what did you learn to do today in Scratch that you think would be interesting or valuable to others in the class? And that they begin to know that that's the question I'm going to ask, because it's exactly those words every time. Initially, students will just show, here's what I did. Like I put this on the screen, then I made it move here. And I'm always, that's fantastic. Now, what did you learn today that was new? So I'm trying to focus and differentiate between what you did today and what did you learn that was new that you think others might find interesting. So all of that's important, but I think the most important thing is that the students have this time where every session at the end, and sometimes it's tough because you can get distracted and you're with a student and the bell goes and it doesn't happen. But if that's always a goal, I think it's really useful. I found it really useful. My students find it really useful. It really helps. And passion and play, it's got to be a playful environment. Students need to learn early on that most of the time things won't work when they're coding in Scratch or coding in anything. And they're playing. They're trying this, they're trying that. That didn't work. Now I got to try this. Go over and ask a friend, can you help me with this? Or they want your help and they want to just discuss it and talk it out. And passion, connecting to their interests is really, really important. So in the spirit of what works for me might work for you, I put this slide in. Again, there's a lot of links on this slide. This is something that I did as a resource teacher several years ago, and I actually just started to do this at the beginning of March with my students before all this happened, and now we can't do it. But this is a project-based learning approach that's called Learning Design by Making Games. So what I did here in this other school and with my class this year is that I asked my students, I'll talk about this year, I said to my students, let's create a game for the grade ones that teaches them how to do something. So you're creating a game, and in this case, it's teaching them how to tell time or something like that. I think this year the choice was between teaching them how to tell time and counting by certain numbers. So the students, starting around February, March, they got together with the younger students in the school, and they interviewed them about what they liked, what games they liked, and what they knew already about telling time. And then they had a design thinking approach to creating the game. They would start creating the game in Scratch, and just like in this example that you see on the screen, this was a grade 4-5 class that was meeting with grade 2s, and they were creating a game that helped teach the younger students about fraction concepts. So that picture that you're seeing on the right there, that's a grade 5 girl talking to a grade 2 boy, and once per month, so this every week the grade 5s, 4s and 5s split class, they worked for 80 minutes, working on their game for their younger student partners. And then once a month, the grade 2s would visit, and they would spend 10 minutes with one student and 10 minutes with another student. They didn't have a specific partner. It was just for the grade 2s in general. But they'd get feedback from the grade 2s, and they would say what they liked about the game, what they hoped would be in the game, what they wanted to see in the game, what they didn't like, and they'd try the game out as it stood on that day. So the games were not done, but they would sort of check them out and give feedback. And that happened once per month. And that, in this particular case, this happened with this school from January, February, March, April, May. And then in June, we called that launch day. That was phase 4. The grade 2s came down, and that was the project had to be done by that day. And we had some balloons, and it was sort of a fun environment, and the grade 2s played their games. And then phase 5 was the consolidation, where they reflected on the whole process of creating those games for those students. There's absolutely no way that I could be doing this with this class or with my own students if the students don't have a level of competence and confidence with the coding environment. So that is an absolute must. So that goes back to that slide that talked about the plan. They have to have that competence first. And it's not competence in every aspect of Scratch. It's a competence that each child will have their own level of competence, because they will have worked on their own programs and projects in Scratch. So one child may be extremely competent and confident in making their games. Maybe they made games for 3 or 4 months. Another child might have made animations. Another child might have done something else in Scratch that's completely different, that's connected to their interests. So they'll each have their own specially personalized confidence and competence in Scratch. So this is one example that I use that's project-based. Now, excuse me. Sometimes project-based learning may not work for the class that you have, or might not be something that you're really comfortable with. Here are a couple of other options that are a little bit more structured and have things like lesson plans and that sort of stuff to help you get started. Scratch Ed is connected to Harvard, and it ran from 2009 to 2019. It was an online site where resources were. They're best known for something called the Creative Computing Curriculum Guide. And I have that actually downloaded, because it takes a while to download. It's a PDF, and you can get a copy of it with a link on that slide. And this is an approach to learning to code that's called creative computing, where it's kind of like the 4P approach. You are trying to connect with students' interests and passions. This curriculum guide it's a curriculum guide for creative computing. It's not so much a curriculum guide for the traditional math, science curriculums. It's a curriculum guide for creative computing. How can we use computers in a creative way to create things that are exciting? But there are definitely lesson plans in here that you can use. And I really encourage you to have a look at it, at least to get some ideas of how it could be used. This is Unit 1, Activity 1, Program to Dance. So it gives you a suggested time, some descriptions, just like you'd expect in a lesson plan. And it sort of shows you a picture of what the screen might look like. And it goes on to show you other activities. So that's a great resource that I would encourage you to check out. Getting back to where we were. And the second sort of more structured way of getting started using Scratch and getting students coding is with CS First. So CS First, CS being computer science, that's run by Google, and I think I already have it open on my screen here. Where are we here? I'll just go to the link here. So in CS First, it's a Google supported tool. So things will remind you of Google environments. So for example, I've already logged in here, but you can log in with your Google account. In Peel, all teachers have a Google account. maybe in your board you do too. When you go to My Classes, it might remind you of what your Google Classroom sort of screen looks like. It certainly doesn't look the same way, but it's kind of the same approach. So you can create a class really quickly. Just give your class a name, and you can pick a color scheme and say create. It's as easy as that, right? And then if you want to add people to your class, you can have them go in with the code, so it creates a code. There's also a share to your existing Google Classroom. So that's really great too, that's there. The other thing that's fantastic about CS First is that there's a curriculum that is already created. The lessons are here. You can just, once you have your class created and you go through the curriculum that's already on the site, you can just add it to your class and you're ready to go. So really, once your students have accounts and all set up, you can get started really quickly. There's some single activities that can happen in the span of about 1 hour. So these are kind of subject specific. Then there's hour of code-based activities. And then there's multi-day activities. So these are 8 separate days of activities. So this is a sort of a longer term approach. I might perhaps use 1 or 2 of these initially to 1 hour activities, and then I might go into multi-day activities. Actually, if I was doing this, I might have several of these, and I'll allow students to kind of choose what they want to do. At any time too, though, if students are or maybe working through one of these, maybe they're using this music and sound activity that I'm just adding to the class now, I'm always amenable to students if they sort of say, well, I'm really interested in this, but then they want to go in a different direction with what they're doing, and they want to start a different kind of project, maybe in this area or it's sort of tangentially related to it. I personally am always amenable to that, and for them to go in that direction, because I'm always thinking of that projects, peers, passion, and play. If they are saying, I really want to go in this other direction, then okay, they're saying, I want to follow my passions more. And students are going to work longer and harder on something that they're excited and interested about and passionate about, and that they own and have sort of agency over, than something that I sort of assign to them. So I'm always, if they would say that sort of a thing, I'm all for it. So again, all of these links are here. These are here. You'll have access to the slide deck afterwards, and those links are there for you to explore and use them in the way that you would like. So hopefully I've showed, just a really quick summary, 3 different kind of approaches. If you want to start with a kind of a project-based approach where you're letting sort of the students' interests and projects drive it, and your role is to support that, then this is a way you could go. If you want students to be, if you want to have a little bit more of a structured approach with lessons, but still make sure it's on sort of the creative side, where that's creativity and agency and computing. That's kind of the philosophy behind the Creative Computing Curriculum Guide. That's available, and that's been updated for the latest version of Scratch. And CS First, that I just showed you, has lots of ready to go 1 hour activities and multi-day activities that you can do. If it's something that you would like to do on your own before your students get into it, that's something I definitely recommend as well. Try some of these activities. Once you've used, teachers have told me, because I've worked with teachers, like was said in the introduction, for several years, and a lot of the time I have worked with teachers doing this with their students, and they've basically said that it seemed so new right at the beginning, but after they spent maybe 3 sessions working in Scratch on their own projects just for fun, they kind of got a sense of, okay, I see how this all works now, and I have a sense of it. And I think that that's a fantastic place to be. Sure, you don't know everything there is to know about Scratch, but I don't think you really need to know everything before you start working with students on it. And what these teachers, the feedback they gave me was that they would share what they were working on, their own projects, with students, and the students would kind of realize and see firsthand the passion that the teacher had with creating these projects themselves, and then they would dial into that, and they would continue and start wanting to do that themselves. So, okay, so let's talk about.
And I'm conscious of time, but I have a few questions for you. Would this be a
Oh,
good moment?
Absolutely, good moment. Yes.
So one question from Sharon was, what subject are you using to give this much time to coding?
Oh, that's a great question. In my schedule is really flexible because the projects that they're working on with coding are really cross-curricular. The ideas that they're using are really cross-curricular. It can go into a lot of different areas, but the one with the project that I was doing with my grade ones this year, it was my sci-tech time. So my math and science time, a chunk of that would go to this.
Okay, awesome. And then there was also a question about music class applications.
Yes, there's lots of musical instruments. I just wish we had like a whole day to talk and mess around with things. But yes, there's lots of musical instruments and sounds in Scratch. You absolutely, I've worked with music teachers and done music stuff with my own students. So there's not so much things like where you can get a rhythm going like you could in, say, GarageBand, but you can definitely have make instruments and there's piano sounds and so forth that you can use, and you can edit those sounds as well. So there's definitely applications there.
Awesome. And the final question was from Rosa Sorenfru. Students with a Google account can get right into CS first, ? Thinking with this distant learning that I could direct them to slide into any of these tasks. Makes sense, or should they have 7 months of Scratch experimentation? ?
No, I think that those three sort of approaches I was trying to give as if people are just at the beginning of things, because one of the questions on the survey, or one of the things brought up on the survey was, how do I just get started with this? And I was trying to think of different ways that might match different kind of approaches that teachers might have. So no, if students have a Google account, they can get started with CS first. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Let's go straight into your examples because I know you've got some great ones.
Okay, so the first thing is I just wanted to mention very quickly, I'm not going to read all this, but anytime I have spent time with students in grade 3 and up using Scratch, I have seen in any sort of session and usually I try to make my sessions about an hour if you can, I see virtually all of the mathematical process expectations engaged. So that's huge. So here's an actual example of me working with a grade 5 class. And this is like 8 slides, but I'm going to go through them quickly. Students in this grade 5 class, they were working on constructing various 2D figures with a paper and protractor, a pencil and ruler in class during this sort of unit in class. And then they were asked in Scratch, because they had used Scratch for a while already, they were sort of challenged with, okay, try to make Scratch draw a 2D figure as well. So this is one particular student. I have lots of examples, but this is one particular student. I changed the name, which is called her Marie, just for sake of names. She was trying to get Scratch to draw a triangle. So when Scratch, when I looked at her code, okay, this is what I could see on the screen. And what was happening here is there's a lot of mathematical thinking going on here. When you look at the code on the right-hand side here, you can, even though I don't see a triangle on the screen right now, right away I can see from the code, okay, she knows that a triangle has 3 sides because I see move, move, and move. I know that she knows that a triangle has 180 degrees in total because I see 3 60-degree turns. And she's trying to transfer her steps that she used on paper to Scratch. So then she kept clicking the flag of the mouse, and I remember this really specifically. She kept clicking the flag over and over, and then faster and faster, and then this is what happened on her screen. And you can probably see it too. There's a hexagon happening there, and that's what she said out loud. Oh, look, a hexagon. And some students came over to have a look, and she changed her code. She added all those other blue blocks, and she made Scratch draw a hexagon. And of course, that's not what the original plan was, but rarely do things really go according to plan. But this was really exciting that she drew a hexagon, but when she was actually trying to draw an equilateral triangle or a triangle of any kind. A student had shared previously about the repeat block, and I think I might have mentioned it. I might have said, you know, the repeat block might be able to help you with your code there. And we talked about that a little bit, and so she changed it, and you'll notice in this screen, there's the same 2 blocks. Whoops, there's the same 2 blocks that are happening. There's six sets of 2 here. So all she did was take out all those extra blue blocks and just said repeat 6, move 100, turn 60 degrees clockwise. So she did this and she changed her code and it looked great. But then I said to her, I was trying to direct back to the triangle goal. Now what's going on with your triangle? And so she changed the repeat block to 3 for 3 sides, and she's got this. And I remember saying to her, there's got to be a triangle going on there somewhere. I mean, I see where you have turn 60 degrees 3 times. There has to be a triangle there somewhere. What's going on? Where is the triangle? So I came back after a while, and she had a protractor on the screen, literally like I'm showing you in the picture here. And she said, I found the 60 degrees. So I was trying to say, well, where is the 60 degrees? They were there in the code, like, why isn't it working for the triangle? And she said, well, if you look at it, the Scratch turns 60 degrees, but she turns 60 degrees clockwise. Scratch turns that way, starting from whatever direction he happened to be facing. So she right away could see on the protractor that what she needed to do was Scratch needed to turn 120 degrees, because she could just see that that was the way it worked in Scratch. So she changed it to 120 and she got her triangle. So this was something that happened over maybe 40 minutes. It's not a fast process. It wasn't something that snap, snap, snap came together. And I don't know what happened when she was figuring out to put the protractor on the screen. But that eventually happened. And probably the most important thing that I did was to sort of say, where are the 360-degree turns? They have to be there because I see them in the code. And that's, I think, the thing in retrospect, probably what might have done it for her. There's been many times where I've said something and still there's nothing happened. So it's a real for me, it's taken a lot of practice, and I continue to try and figure out what the right thing is to say. Now, this is a student from this year in my class this year, and very similarly, this happened just a few months ago. He was trying to draw a triangle in Scratch, and he ended up drawing a circle, and you can hear his thinking. And I'm getting better at remembering to get it out and record them talking it through right at the time. So I want to play this.
I'm gonna make this 16 times.
So you can see in his code, he's trying to draw a triangle, but you can see on the screen there, it's starting to be a circle. So he's abandoned the triangle and he just wants to do the triangle.
I think it's gonna hit the edge. Oh wow, it almost did. Well, it kind of did. So, okay,
so I'm just skipping ahead here because I'm aware of the time. So he keeps on trying different amounts of steps to try and close the circle off and come back to the point at which he began.
yes.
So I thought that was really important to sort of see how he did that. And it really is, there's trying something new, testing, tinkering, playing, experimenting is always a part of what they're doing when they're coding. And you can see there's a lot of mathematical processes going on here when he's been doing this. Now, this happened a few months ago. So yes, this student has been coding for several months before that. Here's a maze game. A maze game is probably become one of the most favorite things that it's the first project that I kind of create with students in front of me, and I go through it because there's a lot of things happening in a maze game that are connected to a lot of the things they might want to do later in Scratch, not the least of which are things like variables, the Cartesian coordinate system, which is in the background, and so on. Hi, Lindy. Oh, that was a 5-minute. Okay, thank you. So there's a project link here. I'm just aware of time, so I just don't want to run out of time here. But there's a project link. When there is a project link to an example project, you can click on that and you can see how it would look in Scratch. So when I do the maze game with students, I start from nothing and I talk it through and I talk about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it as I'm doing it. And as soon as I see them starting to get restless, then I know I have to stop talking and get them started. This is another video. This is a girl here, and I'm just going to describe these videos. If you want to watch these are all Peel students, genuine stuff that I saw happening, and I managed to remember to get a quick video. She's just experimenting, and she just changes one little block, and it has a massive effect on her project. And she was really excited to show me that. This is a boy who is making a Pac-Man game, and he was trying to, this is in the new year, so he had several months of coding with this, but he was trying to code at this particular time to code it so that the Pac-Man mouth could not go through the walls. And he was trying all these different things. It was a really tricky thing for him to do. This is a girl who, this was I think April-ish in this grade 4 class. They had been coding with Scratch for most of the year. This was the first day they started to use Makecode and the microbit. We only had about 5 microbits in the class, so there was a virtual microbit she was using on the screen. And she coded it that session, that day, and she made it play Star Wars theme. She knew how to play it on the recorder, and she used the blocks to play it on the microbit. She'd never used this before, but in a way she had. She knew block-based coding. She had a ton of concepts and a ton of experience with Scratch. And the reason I include this example is that once they've got a ton of experience with any sort of block-based system, you can usually go to another one very quickly and start being productive and create things that are exciting very quickly. And this is a really good example of that. Again, this is another video. If we had time, I'd play it. This was a boy who was a grade 5. He was trying to make a Slither.io game. This was around December. And for people talking about mathematical curricular connections that you're wondering, where are they? In what he was doing, when you hear this video, which is about 3 or 4 minutes of him talking about his thinking, he starts using in very specific terms his use of variables. There's a Cartesian coordinate system that is invisible behind Scratch that's always there. And when students discover that, they have far more control in their games. His understanding of number sense concepts, operation decimal numbers, positive, negative numbers. Yes, that's not part of grade 5 a lot of the time, the negative numbers, for example, but it totally makes sense because he understood number lines, and he understood the Cartesian coordinate system as 2 number lines kind of coming together at right angles, which was this particular kid that you're in this video is the one who told that to me. And I'd never thought of that before he said that, which was amazing. So lots of other slides here. This is an example where you can draw any 2D figure using Scratch. This is the growing pattern. This is a very specific project that was created for students to see a beginning of a pattern and try and continue that pattern in Scratch. And Scratch is beautifully made for that, in that they can click remix. They get all the code when they click on remix, and then they can take the code and start building on it. And there's a project link in the bottom of that if you want to look at that. In grade 8, grade 8's all about, in terms of geometry, all about exploring circles. So they would be making circles using concrete objects, and then trying to transfer that learning into Scratch. And that was really important, that they were creating it with string and markers and paper first, and even their bodies, moving their bodies in circular pathways, and then translating that into Scratch. Another grade 8 example, now this is really explicit in terms of the connections to curriculum. Oftentimes it's not just one specific overall expectation from one specific strand. There's often multiple connections. So in just trying to create a working analog clock in Scratch, the overlap shown on the left of the curriculum expectations is pretty clear. And this is a grade 9, 10, 11, 12 project where students were exploring sine in the unit circle, and they had a little character that they were using to talk about what was happening in the video. So there was like a little animation of where sine comes from, and Giga, the little red character there, was explaining where it was coming from. And the last slide is just some resources, again, that you can look at later if you're interested in taking a look. Now, I know I kind of skipped over fairly quickly these connections to curriculum, but if you go back here to this slide at the beginning, that looks like this. In this particular presentation, I have a solid grade 3, grade 6, grade 8, and grade 9 or 10 link with specific connections to the Ontario math curriculum, at least. that you can sort of see how they connect, because oftentimes that's very, very important to know, because sort of it's up to the, in my opinion, up to the teacher to kind of look for those connections and then try to help the students see those connections in what they're doing. So I don't want to, I know it's 5:01 and I want to honor people's time. I'm very, very happy to stick around and continue to talk to people or answer specific questions if you've got them. I'm also going to share with Lindy that she can send out later an email address if you'd like to connect with me afterwards. I'm always happy to talk about these things. It's one of the things that I'm super interested in and always a student of, and always excited to be learning more and experimenting more. So so I'll pass it back to Lindy, but I'm just letting everybody know that I'm happy to stick around till 5:15ish or even a bit longer if people are interested.
That's amazing, because I can see lots of questions coming up, but I do know that some people have to start. Jim, that was awesome. I felt like I learned so much myself. So it's great that you can stay on for a little bit longer. I just wanted to let people know again that you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the evaluation form. I also put that little link into our chat box. You will have the link to Jim's slide deck, and we will make 100% sure that this is working, because I know that we had a lot of comments all the way through, Jim, that some people could access it and some people couldn't. And then we have lots of upcoming webinars as well if people are interested. A lot of them are already sold out or filled, but we do have some really fascinating ones coming up, including a Making Your Early Years STEM with Ray Mercer, something on Edpuzzle that would promote questioning and real-life examples. And then we have a fun one in French with Yves Rocher on faire ce qu'on en peur. So it's really, anybody who knows French or knows people, teachers who are Francophone, please encourage them to come by. So I'm going to, now that we are kind of allowing people to leave if they have to, but I want to encourage those who can stay. We have another 15 minutes or so that Jim has generously given us so that we can ask some questions. And I did see some coming up on the chat box. I wasn't following them too closely, but if you have some questions, feel free to also unmute yourself and go ahead and ask a question.
Yeah, I might start by kind of looking back at the chat box here that I'm looking at now, and just seeing if there's some things I can address. I did see something that flew by really quickly about multiple languages. Like I said, I think once in the middle there, I wish there was a whole day to talk about stuff. The hardest thing about doing a 1-hour session or webinar is that there's so much I'd love to share about the possibilities. Scratch, absolutely. You can switch the whole interface to different languages. You can have it read in different languages and say things in different languages. There's so much available there, but absolutely those are there. So I'm just looking through the chat box.
Aviva asked if you have curriculum links for grade 1 and 2. I know you showed you had a whole lot of curriculum links. Do you have one?
No, the only reason, curriculum links for grade 1 and 2, I don't have that in my presentation. And that's not because they aren't there. Creative computing, the students of that age love it. Students with K1 and 2, what I've generally done is we've used robots or little things that are created for them, or Scratch Junior, things that are not text heavy, things that are very visual, very tactile. Those tend to usually work better with that level of student. There's a number of, you've taught K and 1, if it's all text heavy and they have to read stuff, it's going to be really super difficult to kind of get there. And that's why I tend to say grade 3, 2, 3 or above for Scratch. But there's definitely things that students can be excited about and do at the primary level. But for me, project-based approach, the 4P approach at that level with students where we've got robots or even non-technology coding where you're using, having students can pretend they're robots and students can program each other to do different things. There's lots of different ideas. I can't think of really specific ones right off the top of my head, but they do exist. And I'm sorry I didn't include that specifically in my presentation, but definitely hands-on stuff, and Scratch Junior, which is very text light and very visual, is what I've seen pretty successful with younger students.
Thanks. I totally forgot about the Scratch Junior.
No, that's okay. Yeah, and Scratch Junior, I don't think it's used as much as it probably could be. And you know, sometimes it's a pain to get it installed on those iPads and get it working and all that. And it's, you know, it's sometimes it's kind of a long list of to-dos to get things going on your tech for students to start using them. So yeah, I think it's worth it with Scratch Junior. It's not really, it's not like Scratch Lite. It's a completely different version of Scratch, and you can't do all the things that you can do in Scratch and Scratch Junior, but there's a ton that you can do that I think when I've worked with younger students, they're pretty excited about it.
Jim, I thought about you were teaching, you know, older grades. They were doing the problems for the younger grades. So at home right now, people who have, like kids who have siblings could do that, or they could even do something to teach their parents something, right? So you could actually mimic that in the current environment, just using family members.
Yeah, and I think with Scratch, because it's free and it's stated to always be free, and you don't even have to sign up with an account. You can just click on create, and away you go. It won't save it. But there are tutorials, and again, I wanted to share those more, and I was just so conscious of time. There are tutorials, video tutorials built into both Makecode and Scratch that will take them through and show that if a student wants to make a game and that's something that you've not really talked about in class yet or whatever, or an animation, you can go through this video tutorial and it will take students through step by step, and they'll go as far as they need to go and then they stop it and away they go. Those are all built in and they're fantastic. They're extremely highly well tested with students, so you're not watching it thinking, boy, students aren't going to watch that. They really do, and then they're very, very effective.
Janice is just talking about some lesson plans that are on the ministry website that she helped to create. So that's awesome. So I think we got most everybody's questions.
Yeah, and I'm still looking through, so I'm just going back quite a ways here, just near to the beginning.
There was one on coding using music. I saw there was that.
Right. And I mean, personally, I think that because coding, for example, coding with Scratch or coding with a microbit, I think if it's treated as a literacy, then it can be used as an expressive tool for any of the arts, music included for sure. And let me quickly switch.
Sorry.
Yeah.
My specific question,
yeah, thank you,
Jennifer, was just, you know, tell me that example of how you take a familiar song and code it. Is it essentially taking the sounds and putting them like for a certain length of time? Is it a duration plus pitch kind of thing?
Yes. So what she did, do you want me to share that screen in Makecode?
Sure, if you don't mind. I don't want to steal the show.
No, I don't mind at all. Just trying to get my screens in order here. I lost my interface to share my screen. Where did it go?
So nice to hear an expert say that. I say it all day long. Where did it go?
Oh my gosh. The technology is great when it does work, right?
Try again. I may have. There you go. I'm viewing your screen now.
Yep. Okay. So let me go to this site. So in Makecode, there's music blocks here. So this student knew, like as I said before, she had learned how to play it on the recorder, and she loved playing the recorder. So she was able to come in and say, okay, so on button A pressed, she could play a tone, so she could choose the tone that she wanted. So it says middle C here. So when you click on middle C to change the note, she can pick the note that she wants, and it plays it. So maybe I want to go on E, and it says how many beats do you want? So I can have that play for half a beat, and then I can continue to bring these in. Or I could right click on those and duplicate it and just bring it underneath and say, now I want to go up to G for half a tone. And then I can click on the top one and it'll duplicate that one again. I can go back. So now when I play, right? So,
yeah, it's a great application of the elements from my perspective.
Yeah, and there's certainly more to it than just those particular blocks, and those blocks aren't necessarily in Scratch, from what I remember. Makecode also has these melodies built in as well, so you can have it play a specific melody. Scratch does have that built in. So if I were to say put in, I don't know, entertainer, and then push the A button.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think that Makecode took the same approach with Scratch, that they thought, okay, there's going to be students that are excited about sounds and music, and then there might be other students excited about other things, and tried to build in as much as they could here. Just that one thing I will say for anybody still here is that you'll notice that when I brought these red music blocks in, it showed the picture of the microbit, and then it showed wires connected to 0 and ground going to these parts of, say, a headphone jack. So, excuse me, the microbit doesn't have a speaker built in, but it can connect to other things like speakers or headphones to do more things, because they couldn't throw everything all into that one thing. And it always tells you what you have to do, or shows you what you have to do. If, say, for example, you're using some blocks that need a speaker or headphones, it shows you how to connect it. So if I were to get rid of these, that will disappear on the left. So as soon as you try to use something that needs something, it shows you how to connect it.
That's
Thank
cool.
you.
You're very welcome.
We're almost down to the wire here. There was a question about, do you have any project ideas to do with math and physics grade 11?
So let me see here. I know in Scratch, so if I go to my, so if I go back to my, I had something where I was trying to create a simulation of gravity with my students in grade 3 this year. I had a couple of students, because you talk about forces in grade 3, and we were talking about gravity and forces. So I had this one project here that I made during this time of distance learning. So I was trying to make it look like the apples are falling to the ground because of gravity. So this is, you could make this a lot more sophisticated, where when you're looking inside, all that I did here to sort of make it happen was, when the gravity was happening, I just changed the gravity variable by -1 as it repeated. So it looked like it was starting slow, and then it was starting to move faster to the ground. An incredibly crude simulation of gravity. But I mean, with students who are, you know, older, and absolutely, if they already have some experience coding with Scratch, that could be something that could be a task for them. There's another thing that I did do with students, and unfortunately I got a number of projects. It was a solar system simulator. We did this in grade 6. Just give me a second here and I'll find it. And with the solar system simulator, all it is really is the sun at the center, of course, and the planets going around. They're just going around in a circle. They're not ellipses, which would be really cool to be able to do that. But again, that's a little bit more advanced in terms of the mathematics. But they were going around in circles, and what we were looking at, here it is we were looking at the orbital periods, because the focus for this particular class was ratio. So the idea was, when you click the flag, it's showing you Mercury, Venus, and Mars, Mercury, Venus, and Earth. You can see Mars up here isn't moving. That's because the students are invited to look at the code and try to now model the Martian orbit, and doing it in such a way that its orbital period is correct with the other.
We can't see your screen. We can't see your screen right now.
Thank you for telling me that.
That's okay.
Give me a second.
And I think we'll end up with this example, since we're down to just 18 people now.
Okay, so let me go on to that. Sorry about that. I forgot that you weren't seeing it. Okay, so this is a orbital periods project in Scratch. It's in I'm Jimmy C on Scratch, and I've got over 100 projects shared, so people can have a look. So the sun is at the center, and we've got 3 planets orbiting. This was a grade 6 project. It could be used in grade 8 too. Certainly concepts around concepts connected to drawing circles could be exploited here. So when you see inside to the code, each of the planets is a different sprite. So there's Mercury, and it shows that it's this forever block here, this forever loop here. It's just showing that it's moving at 1.35 steps and then turning 3.5 degrees. And then when you compare that to Venus and you compare that to Earth, and then with Mars, there's nothing there. So the idea is that students are invited to analyze the code for Mercury, Venus, and Earth, even remix and play with the code. And then, okay, so how could I make the orbital period for Mars be actually an accurate simulation of what's actually happening? So I don't know if that answers the question of that person who was asking, but I think that the more that you're using Scratch, the more you might be able to see these connections in what you're trying to do.
Excellent. Wonderful. All right, we're going to let everybody go.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Jim, for your generosity. It was awesome. I learned so much. I'm sure there are lots of ideas that people are going to take back now. That's
great. I had a great time, and thanks again, those people who are still here. Thank you for coming, and I really enjoyed today. And happy to connect later. I'll let Lindy know what the email is that you can connect with me. I'm always happy to discuss these kinds of things. So thank you.
Take care, Jim. Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.